Thank you. Namaste, Jai Shri Ram. And Jai Shri Krishna, of course. So I'd like to start with an expression of gratitude to Inside UK for giving me an opportunity to visit the erstwhile colonizers' land and perhaps initiate a reverse trend. I really hope to understand the realities of Indian diaspora here, because I understand that the circumstances and the challenges that we face back home may not be the same here. So sometimes it helps to actually get a feel of it firsthand. I've been given a topic and usually I have a track record of veering off track. And let me see if it works here. I understand that a lot of people have already heard me on a variety of platforms. So rest assured, you will have to suffer my political incorrectness for the next 1.5 hours. And of course, you can come at me with as many questions as possible. The only rules of the engagement here would be keep the attack professional, civil, and even personal, limited to my views on the subject. And you don't need to hold back any punches. I will try my best to respond, as long as I will withstand my punches. So I'll take this opportunity to actually speak about my third book for a different reason altogether. I'm the product of the 90s, which means I've seen, I'll just drop the dates and I'm sure the audience will understand. I've seen 1992. I've seen the aftermath of 1992, which is 93. Followed by 1999. I've also seen 2001. I've seen 2004. I've seen 2008. A lot of 11s in between. And my own initiation to this journey, I think, at the hand of Providence in it, for the simple reason that I've had, at least my family has not known anything other than mechanical engineering for 4 generations. So literally we are the nuts and bolts people. So there was no occasion for us to think of this profession whatsoever. In traditional southern Tambram families, if you have to visit the doctor or the lawyer, आपका 7:30 शुरू हो चुका है. So the profession of the black coat and its adherents were the proverbial black sheep in our family. So when I chose to make the transition from engineering to law, despite my clean track record, the first suspicion was perhaps I was high on something. They wanted to check my phone and they wanted to find out the circle of friends I keep company with. I violated even myself. I apologize. So, why is this journey even remotely relevant apart from its self-edificatory value? Is that the people who you see on the social scene today responding and hitting out and hitting back are people from my generation who've seen a certain channel based out of New Delhi vilify our point of view, present us as inarticulate bores who have no idea how to string a sentence in English together. Hence my chosen weapon, which is the language of the colonizer. 3. It was time that we actually presented a coherent narrative because I had witnessed the impact of the divisive agenda, the seeds of which were sown at least 250 years ago in the heart of Bharat, on campuses in 2000s when I was a student. And I suspect it has only gotten worse. So the idea was to find a way to respond to this with some degree of knowledge and with some understanding as to how the system works. So the choice for me was primarily to take up civil services. The thing is, even if you manage to crack the civil services examination, I doubt I would have survived the system with my degree of candor and outspokenness. Because jeev huzuri to mujhse hoti nahi hai. So the only option was to look for another choice of profession. Hence, law, and that too was, I think, completely out of the blue. Even I never thought this would be presented as an option on the table. But when I took up the profession, I then realized the value of this profession, the strength of this profession. And thanks to the profession, I've found the skill sets to be able to contribute to this broader narrative, this grand vision. For the youngsters here, perhaps here's a leaf out of my book that you can use. For the first 7 years in the profession, I kept my mouth shut. And I focused on building my reputation as a competent professional, earned my stripes as a litigator, only after which I started speaking up on the subject. I'm sure everybody has a right to free speech and the right to opinion, but there is also something called as the right to earn an opinion. You have to put in the work. You should know what you're talking about, because otherwise, why should people listen to you? Who are you and what are you? So, the ability to put together a body of work which gives you the ability to hold forth on a subject, that I think is something that has come handy, and that has been my first lesson. So 2009 is when I set foot in the profession. 2009 to 2016, I was an associate partner, whether I rose from the level of an associate or associate partner at a law firm. 2016 is when I went independent. One of the reasons I went independent was I wanted to start taking up constitutional matters of civilizational importance. And those matters required you to hold forth, not just in the court of law, but also in the court of public opinion. But when you happen to be an associate partner at a law firm, your views affect not just you, but also the firm. So the idea was to go independent so that nobody else has to take the responsibility of the flag or the rap for my positions. It just so happens that most of the opportunities that have come my way to represent matters of civilizational importance, again, it's just been, let's say, it's been serendipity at work. From 2018, whether 2016 to 2019, the one thing that I realized during the course of my work in the courts of law was that there was an institutional bent of mind, institutional slant. Whether it is bias or not, I leave it for you to decide. Which made it extremely difficult for the civilizational point of view, the Bharatiya civilizational point of view, to find resonance and an audience in the Indian Supreme Court, not a foreign land. Which I felt was indicative of a deeper problem. And that is what led to the gradual analysis, which gradually led to the books. During the course of my research in some of these matters, especially the Padmanabhaswamy temple matter, I realized that almost every princely state prior to its accession to the Indian Union was a religious state, not a secular state. Clearly, the partition was on religious lines. Surely there were religious affiliations of each of these princely states, whether Hindu or Muslim. Almost every Hindu princely state, which was headed by a monarch or a family, would have a presiding deity. Eklimji for Mewar, Jagannath for the Gajapati of Odisha, Padmanabhaswamy for the Savarkar family, so on and so forth, Chamundeshwari for Mysore, Kashi royal family, obviously, Baba Vishwanath, so on and so forth, multiple examples. So the question I had to ask myself was, if the parts which went on to become the Indian Union were not secular, how did the Union become secular? What explains this slip between the cup and the lip? So what was this transmission loss in between? Where non-secular components result in a secular whole. How did this happen? So that Question was the reason for the book. And it just so happens that 2019 was a particularly tectonic year for Bharat and Bharati civilization, because several developments took place in the same year. 5th of August 2019, 370, yes. Please remember, never call it abrogated or removed, it was amended because it is still there in the book. This is the correction from the lawyer. Never say abrogation. Abrogation is to excise it out or to remove, but it still exists, it was only amended. CAA, the 9th of November 2019, Ramdhanapani judgment from the Supreme Court, which obviously meant the usual suspects had several pronoun moments. Left, right, and center. So I put out a tweet where I basically called India as Bharat. A student who was perhaps on a student visa in the United States responded to that tweet and called my tweet unsecular for having used Bharat as a reference to India. Indian student. Barely must have spent a semester in the United States, must have acquired a fake accent in 30 days. And he must have become an expert in American politics. And therefore he had to grandstand and hold forth on what is secularism, what are progressive values. All I did was to cut, copy and paste Article 1 of the Indian Constitution, which says India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. He deleted his tweet and blocked me. And I felt there is a problem here where people do not even know what they're talking about. And they're so comfortable holding forth on the subject. So clearly we are idiots having practiced the profession for so many years. Having practiced constitution for so many years, we have to learn from students who don't even know what article of the constitution says. That told me that this had to be responded first with a scholarly exercise or a theoretical exercise, where you capture your position in writing for people to consume. Because I could be saying different things in different videos. But if somebody asks, what does this fellow actually stand for? What does this hate monger stand for? This fascist. We have to find out what he stands for. And so I said I will subject myself to the scrutiny of better informed people by putting together a book. So when I thought of writing the book, I had only one book in mind. Because my professional commitments don't give me the luxury of writing. Contrary to popular perception, I'm certainly not a public interest litigator. I'm a hardcore, ruthless, mercenary commercial litigator. With only 10 to 20% of my commercial time being dedicated to civilizational causes, not beyond. I don't have the luxury of being beyond that. The first book took about 6 months and 15 days to finish. And by the time I was done, I realized picture very baki hai. So that turned into 3 books. And by the time I was done with the second book, I realized it would be a tetralogy, not even a trilogy. So I finished the first 2 books in 21 and 22. 23, I said I'll take a hiatus to the book writing, because I didn't want my, commercial competition to benefit from my stint as a writer, because they would have written me off as a litigator, which is bad for me. I took a step back. 24, I had to apply for senior designation, and once I got the silk, I said, Ab Gandhi mein phir se uthaunga. So the third book is underway. Now this entire Prishtabhumi, this Sandarbh, why? Because during the course of the research for the third book, I started asking myself, when did the Hindu consciousness break? When did the Bharatiya consciousness actually break? What happened? So I'll take you into a bit of history. I'll take you back 150 years ago. Just bear with me. I'll try and keep it as interesting as possible. And I promise you, I'll tie it back to the topic. 1757 is a very important year in the history of Bharat, because that's when the Battle of Plassey is fought and won under Robert Clive, the Clive of India as they call it, where he defeats the Nawab of Bengal, and for the first time a trading entity becomes a political entity with a military arm of its own in Bharat. those who had come perhaps in the late 1590s and early 1600s seeking Jahangir's permission to establish trading posts in Bharat, then become a political force, a military force to reckon with for the first time in 1757. Remember, when people say this, they constantly tell you they've ruled us for 200 years. No, they haven't. 1757, they managed to carve out a sliver of Bharat in Bengal, and that was a small sliver. But when you think of Bengal, remember one thing, it's not the Bengal of today. Bengal of then, Odisha, Bihar and Bengal. It's a fairly large province. But compared to undivided Bharat, it's a sliver. So, what was happening in the rest of Bharat at that time? Who was holding the sway? Marathas. Because in 1757, Balaji Baji and Vishwanath was still present. Which means the third battle of Panipat had not taken place yet. Which I think took place in 1761, Makar Sankranti. Until 1761, the Maratha Empire is literally spreading everywhere, and they managed to even defeat Abdali. They don't tell you this. They defeated Abdali in 1757 after, I think, his sack of Mathura. And they planted the saffron in Attack. And most people think that by 1761, after the Third Battle of Panipat, the Marathas were a spent force, which is not true. Because from 1761 to 1771, the Marathas reconquer the rest of Bharat, and the so-called Mughal emperor has become a puppet in the hands of the Marathas. Because Delhi was taken over by the British not from the Mughals, but from the Marathas. After 3 Anglo-Maratha wars, the last one being in 1819 or 1880. Even then, Bharat had not been won. Why? The Sikh Empire was still around 1799 until 1846, until the final Anglo-Sikh War. That is, I think, until the Treaty of Amritsar. 1846 is when they conquer Punjab. 1847 is when they conquer Sindh. So an activity which starts in 1757 is completed by and large only by 1847, and they are kicked out by 1947. What 200 years? Where did these 200 years come from? That is the myth. So this is one myth. The other myth about Indian history is a larger figure, 800 years of whatever. No truth in it. No truth in it whatsoever. So in 1763 something starts. How many people have watched or read Anand Math? Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's book Anand Math. Also it was picturized on big screen, on the silver screen, which captures perhaps the most underrated rebellions of contemporary modern history, the Sannyasi rebellion. You know the so-called First War of Independence, but you don't know the Sannyasi rebellion. How long did the First War of Independence last? Barely 16 to 18 months. By 1858, they were wiped out. The Sannyasi rebellion lasted almost 40 years, from 1763 to 1801. And this was not by a professional military force, it was by Nagasadhus. With weapons, with very little military training in terms of modern military training, but these were professional warrior ascetics. Who founded these professional warrior ascetics? You will not guess it. You will not be able to guess it. Exactly. Adi Shankaracharya. Because he set up the Dasnami sect of ascetics. Puri, Giri, Aranya, so on and so forth. These are the names. Each of these sects being associated with the 4 matas. And he divided them into 2 components. Shastradharis and Shastradharis. And the Shastradharis are the ones to protect each of our places against whose over invasions, 800 invasions. And these are the ones who continue to congregate at the Kumbh Mela. That is the continuity of this civilization. We are that old and we are still around. We rarely get credit for it. When is it that we start changing our consciousness? Not during the invasions prior to the colonization. Not even during colonization. It starts only in the 1830s when they introduced the English education system. That's when heat reset begins. It goes back to factory settings. And factory settings are now rewritten in English. The language of coding is English, the software is altered. Once the software is altered, the line begins to think that it's a lamb. And there starts the problem. So that's where, remember one thing, military defeats are overrated and hyped. Cultural defeats and mental defeats are barely understood. Because a military defeat is usually permanent and transient until you accept it. Cultural defeat is such that once you concede an inch, the wolf knows how much to grab. And if one generation has been converted to the colonizer's ideas, you've had it. No wonder you have speeches given at MIT by people who have nothing to do with the issue in question, who are appropriating every cause under the sun except their own cause. Mental slaves of the first order, lacking in utter originality, or utterly lacking in originality. So the point was, that is when the civilization started losing its sense of self. The last nail in the civilizational coffin, pun intended, was 1857. That was the last time they allowed you to pick up a weapon. And then started the reign of ahimsa. Much before the person embodied ahimsa himself, or selected ahimsa. We are where we are today because of a fissure within Hindu or Bharati or Sanskritic consciousness. Hence the need for Hindutva. Hindutva was neither coined or founded or conceived of by Savarkar. It is a myth. He was not the first person to do it. Since the first place of colonization was Bengal, the first resistance also started in Bengal. And it is important for people to know the history of proud resistance presented by Bengali Hindus so that you know how far we have travelled in 2025. 1892 was the first time Hindutva was coined by Chandranath Boshu. In his book, Hindutva, I think it says Prakriti Hindu or Prakriti Hindur, which means Hindutva. The essence or the nature of Hindus, basically Tva means ness, so Hindu-ness. So therefore the point is the essence of being a Hindu, that is Hindutva, that's it. And he lists out a series of qualities which make us Hindus. So if someone tries to tell you Hindu and Hindutva are different, then they don't understand basic grammar. That means they don't understand basic Hindi or Sanskritic grammar, which proves my point of colonization. So therefore, to those people, I have to say Hindutva means Vache Hinduness. Okay? So how can Hinduness be different from Hindu? What is the essence of being Hindu? You understand the distinction or lack of distinction being British and Britishness, don't you? So that is Hinduness. Now the point you have to understand is, how do you define it? There are lots of myths which pervade about this concept. Hindutva has two concepts, or let's say two facets to it, according to me, like any other concept. One is the internal, antarmukhi, and the other is external, which is bahimukhi. First of all, you need to know who you are. In the language of my friend Pankaj Saxena, who's recently released a book called Swayambodh and Shatrubodh, you first need to know Swayambodh. Who are you as a Hindu? Because if you don't know who you are, how do you hope to protect yourself against the other? Of course, there is another. We are all one, all that is okay, but there is another. As long as there are multiple nationalities and identities, there will always be the concept of otherization. You can't run away from it. Second, therefore you have to define the other as well. And that is called Shatrubodh, or a knowledge or understanding of the adversary. For far too long, what has happened is Hindutva has been viewed through a reactionary lens. And perhaps the blame for it lies significantly at our own doors for not being able to explain it properly to people. We haven't told them the historical context of Hindutva and the necessity for it. It's not as if we are the products of, let's say, far-right movements of the 19th and 20th century of Europe. So you cannot compare our example, our history with what happened in this continent or in the European continent. Because it's almost as if their story is, the story of the West is the story of the West, which it is not. We have our own stories to tell. We are not going to follow your trial and error processes and methods. We have our own experience. And we know why this is an existential imperative or necessity if this civilization has to survive at least another 50 years. And I'm saying this with some degree of responsibility. Because I do believe, while we are better off on several fronts, from an identity perspective, we are perhaps worse off than we were in the 19th century. Because all this while, you were fighting the other. Who are you fighting now? People with you. So that means the strategy has managed to successfully perform what Christopher Nolan calls an inception. And you've started believing that your ancestors were barbarians, they were patriarchs of the first order, they were castes of the first order, so on and so forth. All the choicest of epithets have been bestowed on their ancestors. And we are lapping it up, lock, stock and barrel, and saying, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. You're right, sir. This is after so-called independence. So the point is, we have achieved political independence, but not civilizational independence or decolonization. That mental vikriti continues. In fact, we have doubled down on it post-1947. Therefore, what is the meaning of Hindutva? What is the role that it performs? One, it primarily performs the role of a shield to protect what we have managed to preserve after years and centuries of invasions and colonization, as well as the role of a sword when needed. And you don't need to run away from it. It has a dual purpose. But only if I'm forced to raise the shield, I will need to raise the sword. You leave me alone, I'm fine. Let me be. My policy is live and let live. You forced me to a corner, and therefore I've had to come up with ways of self-preservation, and this is one of those ways. Or perhaps the only way at this point. It just so happens that as a country or a civilization, we find it beneath our dignity to wallow in a victimhood complex. And therefore they have decided we've never been victims. Because you've chosen not to make a story out of your victimhood, unlike a few others, who survive on victimhood for generations together, where cottage industries are still kept alive solely on victimhood complex, brands and institutions survive exclusively on victimhood complex, spread across continents, spread across now faiths, regardless of where they come from. Every town, Dick and Harry wants to actually adopt that particular cause without even knowing what the basis is. We have not presented our story in its entirety. And therefore, the history of our persecution, prosecution, and victimization has been completely airbrushed and pixelated. Because you see, the question is, if you were so victimized and persecuted, how are you still around and how are you so successful? You should ask the question, the very same question of people. I should perhaps deny the Holocaust because you're still around. There must be some problem with that entire narrative. How is it that you're so comfortable purchasing that with respect to one community, whereas we have survived or witnessed waves of holocausts, perhaps the most bloodiest of it? As always, it is not their job to tell your story, it is our job to tell our stories. There is only so much that you can actually blame the other for. When there are doables within and you don't do them, you have to take the responsibility because the blame lies exclusively, if not exclusively, at least primarily at your doorsteps. Hence, the renaissance which we are witnessing at this point. In my view, while people celebrate 2014 for a lot of other reasons, 2014 could not have happened in a vacuum. Things led to it. And they had reached a charam sima, a tipping point. And when you finally start asserting yourself, especially at the political level, that's when people have a problem. आज तक खरीद की हड्डी नहीं थी, अब कहां से आ गई? Bend, stay supine. Listen to us. Remain third world and subservient. That's where you are. And I'll tell you how this mind works. And I challenge anyone to challenge me on these facts. From whichever institution, or whichever level. The colonizer believed in what he called the tree of civilizations. And in that tree of civilization, there was a particular pecking order or a sequence priority. Guess who was at the top of it? Surprise, surprise. His problem when he came to the shores of India was, we managed to conquer these people, but still somehow they managed to retain their spiritual core. There is something about the civilization that we're not able to wrap our heads around. And therefore he starts saying, if at all there is something worthy of emulation, or let's say, there is something of value your civilization has to offer, surely there must be a white component to it. Somewhere somebody would have inseminated you. And that is the root of the Aryan invasion theory, because he starts off by saying, all that is great is white, and victory is white. And then starts the Aryan invasion theory with no knowledge of genetics, with no knowledge of anthropology, purely mapping languages onto culture, saying a language is indicative of your origins, whereas language could be transient. That's how it starts. The Aryan invasion theory is then weaponized to divide the Hindu society from within. To say, some of you come from outside, some of you are natives. Therefore, they tried to create and manufacture colonizers from within the Hindu society. And therefore you have my brothers from the south. Who now have actually purchased that entire nonsense, that garbage, utter pile of trash, lock, stock and barrel with pride, with indigenous pride. Indigenous pride for an alien theory which has no basis in your lived history. It cannot get more warped. So, if you understand, and if you wish to understand colonization, you are not trying to understand history, you are trying to understand the continuing present. And that is the reality of Bharat as it is. So, this is not an archival study like a tourist going into a zoo trying to understand these animals, or when you're trying to look into a museum to understand the past. That museum still exists with the living creatures behaving like relics, colonial relics. Hindutva is a call to go back to the basics. It is not xenophobic by any yardstick or imagination, because the Hindu identity and therefore the Hindutva identity is not based on the concept of race. That's what these geniuses fail to understand. You are obsessed with race and color, we are not. Look at me. We are not. My shade is perhaps the brother shade of cherry blossom. People know what I'm talking about. It's a black shoe polish. Okay? And I wear it proudly. Because once you go black, you don't go back. My point is, you come to Bharat and tell us, what color do you want us to celebrate, Baba? What features do you want? This is the traditional Indian thali, you can get everything here. All sorts of flavors are available here. So please junk your ethnocentrism and keep it outside Bharat before you think of our civilization. As the old Maggi tomato sauce ad says, it's different, we are different. I'm sure that generation understands this reference. Javed Jaffri's advertisement, right? With Pankaj Kapoor. It's different. We are different. You will never be able to understand us as long as you wear the Eurocentric lens and you approach Asian continents, especially Bharatiya subcontinent, not South Asia, it is Indian subcontinent. You cannot understand us. Look at the continuing attempts at erasure. Every India chair is an anti-India chair. Every India department is almost an anti-India department, which is being funded by Indian billionaires and magnates across the world, whether it's Harvard or Oxford. Because when we point fingers at him, he'll say, oh, look at your own people, what am I supposed to do? He's managed to create weapons from within our own community. So, when you try to understand Bharatiya history, remember, one of our most celebrated kings, I think it's Kanishka, is not even of the so-called Indian stock, if at all there is an Indian stock. He comes from what you will now perceive as a Chinese race, and he's still seen as an Indian ruler. Because for us what matters is consciousness, which is rooted in the concept of dharma. And dharma is not religion. Your language does not have what it takes to accommodate us. You are the people of the book, we are the people of the earth. Our identity comes from the earth. We are the people of the sky, Asmani. We are different, spiritual, therefore Ruhani. So, I would urge people, especially the youngsters, if you wish to be rebellious, rebel against stereotypes, the negative stereotypes which are attached to your identity. That is the rule to be broken as on date if you wish to take the rule. That is what you should be rebelling against. Somehow your hearts seem to beat for every indigenous cause across the world except yours when you are perhaps the first ever indigenous cause to set foot on earth. To actually create the first ever civilization, the oldest civilization, I dare say it. So, the attempt through the books and these engagements has been to define and bust myths. A lot of people, I'm sorry if this statement hits home, you'll have to lump it, chose to flee Bharat for opportunities to avoid caste reservation and whatnot. Well, it has come here, it has come there, both America and the UK, because the problem is your identity, and as long as you wear your identity, they will never stop haunting you. They have a problem with your identity. So for once, turn around and take a stance, because if not for yourself, what are you bequeathing your children with? What are you leaving them behind with? Is the question you have to ask. I don't think we have the luxury of passing this problem on as legacy anymore, Roger. It has to be put an end to in our own life and times. So there is a movement that's managed to gather pace in Bharat. It's no more a storm in a teacup. And the best part is that it has managed to find an audience across the world. Here's the proof of it. I'm inviting you to stop being silent spectators who clap and to participate in it. We don't have the time. We do not have the time or luxury to merely be silent spectators, because you can afford to be silent spectators if the outcome doesn't affect you. Whether you like it or not, your skin is in the game. Your stakeholders to it. So please participate. Don't raise people like me or Anand on a pedestal, because that is too much of a burden to put on us. And the magnitude of the problem is such that this no personality cult can succeed in delivering the goods here. This needs to be a people's movement and not a personality-based movement. Participate as much as possible, yatha shakti, yatha samadhi. I am not here to ask you to contribute chanda. I don't need to do it. I'm asking you to first of all invest your soul in it. That is the biggest chanda you can offer. And your commitment. And then whatever follows is a consequence of the decision that you take. These engagements cannot be what I call soda bottle engagements, where out of sight is out of mind, where the moment I walk to the room, the excitement has come down. It needs to translate to something concrete, assuming you see the value in that investment for your own futures here. I'm localizing the issue and the challenge and the problem for you. Allow me to also say something much more uncomfortable. Perhaps there was a time where Bharat needed its diaspora to do the batting for it in these countries. Today, you need Bharat more than Bharat needs you. We will take care of ourselves, but we wish to take care of you as well, because that is the mothership. You belong to us. So think of it as a flying carpet or a magic carpet policy that a particular country introduced, perhaps in the 50s and 60s, to save its people. This is a similar idea at work. Except we are saying you must remain where you are because you have a right to be where you are, and you have a right to be treated with dignity wherever you are. Do not allow anyone to shame you or guilt trip you because of your identity. That is perhaps the only message, perhaps the most fundamental of messages that I have to convey, nothing beyond. Support your children if they're interested in pursuing a career in humanities, because it is the humanities that's being weaponized against us. Okay? Enough STEM, that's done. First generation, second generation, Maslow's needs have been fulfilled. Okay? Hookah, pani, everything's done. Go to the next level. Actively participate in the public discourse here and the political life here, because if you don't, you know who will take over. If the good guys don't step in, the vacuum will always find a way to fill itself up, because power as a vacuum does not exist. It does not brook vacuum. And it's always good for people who are law-abiding, who are peaceful, if not pacifists. There's a difference between the two, who choose to wield power in the interest of Lok Kalyan, not just Hindu Kalyan. Because we believe in Loka Samasta Sakna Bhavantu. We pray for peace and happiness for the entire world. It is not based on greed, it's not based on bliss. So you must have an active stake here. Please make sure that you remain model citizens in your adopted homelands. You must be the benchmarks for fantastic behavior. But let that polite behavior not be mistaken for weakness. आज की सभा यहीं पे समाप्त करता हूँ। I don't know the questions, it's not a scripted Q&A. I have no idea what I'm going to be thrown at. Yeah, please.
What a moment of epiphany that was. Thank you, Sai Deepak for your boundless compassion in sharing your wisdom so generously and
Grateful, thank you.
So, before we move on to the question and answer session, I request you to please be respectful, courteous, and keep your questions brief and within 30 seconds.
I'd say make more sense, you don't need to be polite. That just makes sense.
Please mention your name and your city when you ask your question. So, if you haven't already submitted your questions, this would be your last opportunity. We received one question on email. First. Is there a self-imposed self-righteousness harming Hindus?
Yes. We are geniuses who celebrate Chanakya without understanding what Chanakya actually said. Deal with the other in a language that the other understands. That is the first thing. If he understands dharmic behavior, बहुत अच्छे. If not, we will show what does Tantra do. The first person to actually crack this code after centuries of innovations was Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. That's why he was That's why he made such a difference. Because he said, these guys do not understand our code of war, they don't understand our rules of war. There's no point in actually being civil in a battlefield when he's perfectly comfortable stabbing in the back. He's perfectly comfortable waging battle at night. He is perfectly comfortable treating women and children as war booty. What do they call it? Mal ganimat. Then, how do you respond? Then you must respond in kind. And even there, he managed to show restraint and civility. That's the beauty of it. So, you don't, that's what the question I keep asking is, what is this audience that you're trying to cater to and trying to be prim and proper and all that in a battle, in a civilization battle? You're not going to gain or get brownie points for being good. Be good to those who understand it, who value it, and who deserve it. If not, self-preservation is the first rule at this point. You need to. And here you don't need to apply these self-imposed PC filters in your head and consciousness. Not needed. If you can't even get to vocalize the truth, I doubt you'll even have the spine to stand and represent it and act on it. Speak first. Next.
Our next question is from Anirban Galimella. What would your advice be for a 12-year-old Hindu child born in the UK about practicing Hindutva abroad? Can Arvind please stand?
We should actually consider ourselves lucky that there's a 20-year-old sitting here. This is important. And we've managed to ask such a pertinent question because he's saying, "Ye sab to theek hai, mere liye kuch to batao." He's saying, make it useful for me, contemporize it for me, make it relevant to my circumstances in school and colleges. Brilliant, exactly, that's where the background is, because that's where they face the bullying.
Yeah.
You know, you can't handle the problem on the chain. Your elders have to create institutional mechanisms and familiar mechanisms to protect you. A child in school wears its identity confidently on its sleeve or on its forehead, as the case may be, with the confidence that its community stands behind it, which is not something that they know consciously, they take it for granted. What has been missing, whether it's Bharat or elsewhere, when it comes to this community, has been its spectacular ability to kill its own institutions. To kill its own institutions, break whatever exists. You have atomized yourself so much, and now you wonder, where is everybody gone? You alienated yourself because individualism, individual rights. Strike a balance, have a sense of proportion. Sure, protect your individual dignity, but that's not a loggerhead. You're being part of a community and having community obligations. It's not a zero-sum game where it's constantly mutually destructive and they exist at the expense of the other. No, they don't. So, the answer to the boy's question is to you. Create mechanisms. Use the temple, use the institutions, use community organizations to ensure that the child's back is safely secured by you. It's for you to actually protect his back or her back or their back. 2. To you. Maybe it's too premature a suggestion to make or precocious a suggestion to make for their age, but I'll make it nevertheless because I think I have benefited from it a bit too late. Establish a personal connection with your gods. And parents must make sure that they lead by example. Because that's the only thing that will hold you in good stead when you're alone. I know that for a fact when I was attacked on campuses for the Vibhuti. I know that for a fact even today, people in my own professional realms are attacking me. But the good part is, I have oodles of skin on me. So it's watered on the duck's back. And 2, I honestly don't care. That is the kind of shamelessness you should aspire for. Please do. Because I can't guarantee that the community will always be there to help you. And second, if a community has a problem when it's in the majority, it also has a problem when it's in the minority. Then there's a problem with the community whether it's a majority or a minority. उस रोग का कोई निवारण नहीं हो सकता है. As I think the movie Chariots of Fire, which is a fantastic movie, it has a brilliant quote: "Man can't put in what God has not." But you have 33 gods. It's not 33 crore gods, by the way. Koti there is not crore. All your gods have actually put that in you. You just have forgotten it. It's a self-imposed amnesia, self-imposed restriction. Unplug from the matrix. Take the red pill and realize the truth. So for the child, we have a duty to create a safe space and a strong space for the child, outside physically and within. So when I started this journey of engaging with the public in 2016, I was telling this to the organizers during my interactions. Quite a few people came and told me, now is when your journey begins, sadhana shuru kijiye. And I was like, what sadhana? Who is this person? I have no interest. I don't have the time. I barely have the time for my nitya karma, but I do all of this. When the attacks increased, I realized that the only way you're going to withstand this is through Atma, nothing else. And therefore, at the heart of it, the answer is not social, the answer is not cultural, the answer is not economic, the answer is not political, it is spiritual. That's the question. As long as you beat around the bush and you don't hit the nail on the head here, this is the nub of the matter here, until and unless you cross that saransh, you're playing a game which is perhaps superficial. You're not from the West, which means you understand the other worldly as well. They have lost touch with it. They've killed it. Whatever was there was killed, according to me, in the 1500s and the 1600s, thanks to a certain reformation. You still have your institutions, your sampradayas intact after all these centuries. If you protect that and you retain your connection with it, I don't know whether you succeed or not, you will certainly have the reed ki handi and a stronger spine to withstand the situation and look for solutions. So I'm not here to wave a magic wand and say, Chumantar ho gaya, everything's done. No, this is not it. But I think the biggest strength that anybody can ask for or pray for is the strength to deal with the situation more than the solution to the situation. You should have the ability to do it. sadhana is where it starts. Make sure that the Ajna Chakra, the forehead, always is populated with a tika. Always. And if someone asks, have the shamelessness and the guts to brazen it out. Some people literally get away with murder. We are not even doing that. We don't even do that. So make sure that the parents give the child confidence and lead through example. Do not wipe off your foreheads before you step into your office spaces. Don't do it. Well, fortunately, I've had a Prime Minister who wore the Kala of the Raksha Kavach. I think now it has become cool, or cooler if it was never cool in the first place. Right? Next.
Thank you. The next question is from Ramakrishna. Do you want to read your question, Ramakrishna?
Are there two Ramakrishna ji? There is a confusion. You have to identify if there's an initial.
Sorry, Namaste.
Just
It's a blunt question. My name is Chandrasekhar.
Jesus.
In the mention in the concept of the roots of identity, why Indians are not good timekeepers? Why Indians are not good timekeepers?
I take it as a time with me. Because for us, Kal is not linear, it's a chakra. We believe the concept of Brahmakal. What is this Kal? Brahma woke up, Brahma was born. Brahma closed his eyes, Brahma was dead. So to take this seriously and to not reduce this to some kind of a facetious answer, in my view, let me perhaps give a slightly politically incorrect answer, which goes against the grain of what I have said so far. There are some aspects from the West that you have to learn. Because it's not as if we have everything to offer and they have nothing to offer. And if anybody thinks that the message of decolonization is to actually reduce it to cultural jingoism or civilization jingoism, that's not it. We believe that every civilization has something of consequence and worth to offer to the pool of human thought. What is it that the West has done brilliantly? Organization. Its ability to, an organization translates to the macro level as well as the micro level, from the documentation to keeping time. Everything. But what is it that they have managed to do which has brought them to the point of, I think, the beginning of their end in terms of cultural decline, is that they have themselves killed any possible approach which is spiritual in nature. We have kept that alive, but that's no excuse for being tardy in this world. And we don't need to actually think that they are mutually destructive. Again, as I repeat, our civilization does not believe in a binary approach. Both have, let's say, a certain value to present. Which is why I think the first contemporary modern age Hindu saint to understand this and present this was the other Narendranath Datta, Swami Vivekananda. And therefore the very first mission was established in the West, not Belur Math. It was established in America. Because he said we have a lot to learn from them. There has to be this technology transfer that takes place. We transfer inner technology, they transfer the external technology. That's the battle that we'll have to resort to at this point to catch up. So I take your point and I apologize for coming late. Unless the suggestion is that I overstayed my welcome.
So I'll just read out the question to...
There's the other one, is it?
Yes.
Yes, please. Yes.
As a Supreme Court lawyer who is an expert in the constitution thing, as a result of the consensus whenever it happens, do you think it is possible to stop the reservation quota going above 50%, or will there ever be a situation where there won't be any reservation at all in India?
How many want me to answer this question? Sure, please. You suffer the consequences now. The onus is not in me. Sometimes I think if you initiate a conversation at the wrong moment, even if it's the right conversation, the audience is not ready for it. I think if anything, Operation Sindoor is established. They have dropped the word. If we have to compete with all these forces, merit has to be given its due. If you wish to compete with all these belligerent forces, and you can't be sure that you can consume or you can source technology from the outside, and you have to build it from within. And if you're so keen on Atmanirbharta, which appears to be one of your slogans at this point, then you will have to make sure that merit is given its due and it doesn't look for the first opportunity of flight to greener pastures or greenbacks. So we have to find a way to balance two things: respect for merit, opportunity for merit, conducive atmospherics for merit, and also address perhaps a few outstanding issues, which are legacy issues. My own position has been that we have poorly understood the so-called caste problem, because the word caste should not be used with it. I have always said it's a Varna Jati issue, it's not a caste issue. Because caste is not our word. Again, there's a problem of semantics. Just as we should not be using religion as a synonym for dharma, you can't be using caste as a synonym for Varna Jati and Kula system. It's a very different system altogether. In my view, what colonization also did was to castize Varna Jati problem and impose that filter on us. People say, okay, caste comes from Portuguese, but why? What does it do? Caste actually has a blood link, wherein, depending on the purity of the blood, castes were created in Portugal and in those jurisdictions where they colonized. And that's not how Varna Jati actually works. So I've said this before, and in fact I wrote a piece in the Indian Express last year. I said caste is a Western construct. Literally, I was subjected to a ton of bricks. Because people said, are you saying that there's no caste problem? I said there's a Varna Jati problem for sure, which is complicated by the caste problem. And if you're comfortable to accept, you're comfortable to even understand, and you think that, let's say, there are certain words which have no synonyms or no translatables from Indic languages to English, that is the very same problem that you must attribute equally to the Varna Jati issue. They don't understand Varna, they don't understand Jati. So, the sad part is even we don't understand it. Because for 200 years we've actually purchased their version of our history. So the tourist view of Taj Mahal has become our view of Taj Mahal. Forget Taj Mahal, Madurai Meenakshi. Okay? That is the long-term issue which will first require a scholarly response, a historic response. Because you see, political conversations cannot happen without preparation of such a sensitive subject. The audience is not ready for it yet. So you first need the theoretical grounding, the foregrounding. From there, you go to the public discourse, and from there, you go to the political discourse. Because the political discourse is typically the last mile and the worst mile. Because there you have vested interests fishing in troubled waters. And two, messaging, political messaging is always crude and blunt, and caste is an extremely sensitive subject. My apologies, Varna and Jati are extremely sensitive subjects. And if there is a slip in what you say, there are serious consequences for the speaker as well as for the society. So that is the long-term issue. But sometimes what happens is, if you believe in niyati, Niyati creates certain circumstances where you realize, if I don't give talent its due, I will not be able to meet the challenges which surround me. And the Shakti Pradarshan that Bharat has done through Operation Sindhu has reinforced the need to respect talent and to respect merit, especially homegrown indigenous talent, because you don't know if you can trust the person who you've been sourcing these armaments from. Okay, you never know. As they say, there's a country which is a bad enemy but a worse friend. Right? So you can't trust that country anymore. So perhaps economics could lead us to revisit these issues, or national security could lead us to revisit these issues faster than we thought. So let's see if that happens. How many more questions, ma'am?
We think this will be our last question for today. Dr. Sudhakar Krishnaswamy.
Being in an RI.
This goes on YouTube, so use the mic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Namaskar.
Namaste.
Thank you for the speech, a wonderful speech. My question is, being an NRI for us here, how can we contribute for the growth of Bharat while preserving our Hindutva? Thank you.
You have to become self-sufficient here and self-reliant here and protect your position here first. And that's why I said Bharat can take care of itself. We need you to become fairly strong arms here for us to be able to push the There is nothing surrender about it, and there is nothing sinister about it. All we are saying is, our people must be the best possible representatives of citizenhood. And they must also know how to make their voices heard and presence felt within the system here. When you do that, you will be of some consequence to Bharat's interests. That's the best way to do it. Your remittances don't matter to us anymore. You can send those remittances to your families, but we don't need it for the common pool of Bharat's funds. You focus only on one thing. Strengthen your position here to the extent, to such an extent, that if there is, let's say, misinformation, disinformation, or propaganda against Bharat, its interests, its identity, its culture, we don't need to respond from there, the response must be from here. Be a nice person, but you don't need to be the good boy. There's a difference. Okay? And two, I have actively suggested and made this suggestion to the Hindu diaspora or even the Indian diaspora if they're interested, which is invest in purchasing properties around temples in Bharat before it is taken over by hostile entities. Form a collective pool of trust, take over those lands, you have the resources, buy them out quickly, as quickly as possible, so that you preserve the purity of those spaces and the identity of spaces surrounding the temple. I've said this to people. The biggest contribution that you can actually make at this point is to preserve those spaces so that the core energy and the energy of the place surrounding it remain intact. Thank you. I hope this has been useful and not entertaining. And I hope it has been of some value, because I'm not here to seek individual relevance. I genuinely hope that you jump into this yajna, Bharatiya yajna at this point. It needs to last for at least 25 years, minimum 2 generations, for us to survive this cycle of tumult we are about to enter. Because Bharat's rise is not digestible to quite a few. This is the time we'll find ourselves utterly alone. And I want to come to a point where my best plan is me, plan A is me, plan B is me, plan C is me. I don't need others. It's for others to jump onto this party because Bharat's party is just about started. Second, the other side of the cycle of tumult is the age of Bharat. And by that I don't mean Bharat as a country, but Bharat as an idea. We will tell the world and we will educate the world. I use the word educate conscious, even if it is condescending and patronizing. We will teach you what it is to coexist without erasing identities. don't need to teach us diversity. You don't understand the scale of our diversity. You have no idea what you're talking about. And your penchant for diversity is newfound. We have always lived with it. We take it for granted. So for that gold needs to start, for that Amrit Kal to start, the investment should have already started. So please continue making that investment. This investment, so I'll give you an example and I'll leave it at that. I'll just take 30 seconds to borrow from Anand's language. So there's a particular founder of an email service who's been suddenly trying to break into the India conversation because all these days he had no interest in the India story. And now he wants to jump into his India story, which means the India story is a cool story at this point, and everybody wants him in. They want to buy him. And I think we don't need you. Because what you have to offer, that message, is way past its sell-by date. We're now consuming an expired good, we don't need you. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is, it is now the in thing to be a part of the India story. Especially after Operation Sindoor. Especially after. For the first time, Bharat and its adherents have such a large landmass, united political entity at its disposal, with the fourth largest army, but perhaps the most battle-hardened army at this point, and which now has the wherewithal to respond to every challenge and multiple challenges at the same time. And that, I think, a lot of people are finding it hard to digest and swallow. You're saying, nevertheless, bachana to padega bhai. You have to do it. We will force you to do it now. Therefore, jump in, contribute to the story before you become an also ran. Jai Hind, Jai Shri Ram.